When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm Oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Today, we're very glad to have with us a special guest, Philip Slayton, who is the author of many books. He's a lawyer, former president of PEN Canada, which is a writers' organization. His most recent book is a compendium of essays from his Substack newsletter called The Endgame that he's been writing since 2022. Very engaging book. The first number of essays are specifically about getting older. So when we came across that, we thought we'd want to talk to Philip a little bit about how things are going. So welcome, Philip, and jump right in.
Well, you just introduced me, Greg and Janet, to the word oldish, a word that I didn't really know before, but I like it. I would join myself the ranks of the oldest. What I like about it is that old suggests you've arrived. It's a state, that you come to the end. There's nowhere to go from being old. But oldish suggests it's a process. You're on a journey, if you will, that you have not yet come to the end of the journey. So I think it's a good word. I would be happy to adopt it.
Well, welcome to the Honorary Society of Oldishness. And I wanted to add that your title, All Remaining Passengers, also includes All Remaining Passengers, Essays from the Edge of 80.
I started writing those essays before I reached 80, and I'm now 81 and on my way to 82.
I wanted to just say as an introduction that I loved this book. I felt like it is our book. It expresses who we are and why we do this podcast. I felt like it was a love letter to aging, and that this book gave me hope that we can age honestly and kindly. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I think one of my main purposes in writing the book was this. There are lots of new things associated with aging, with being oldish, some good and some not good. And I think when I think of my contemporaries, my cohort people, my friends who are more or less the same age as I am, many of them do not like to talk about or even face up, in my opinion, to the bad things. I mean, they're certainly very conscious of the bad things, but they don't like to talk about them. It's almost as if it's a deep, dark secret that's best not revealed. And I think that is a bad idea. I think as you age, there's two things in very general terms that you need to do. One of them is to face up to your circumstances, some of which will be good, but face up to them, try and understand them, and to the extent you can do something about them, do that. Often you can't. But the other thing is to recognize that not everything is bad. There are many good things associated with being old, and you have to focus on those as well. I'll give you a concrete example. One of the most unfortunate parts, I think, of being oldish, I'm now using your words, one of the most unfortunate things about being oldish is that your friends have this remarkably a bad habit of dying on you. So people in your world empty out. And that is a very distressing thing, or can be a very distressing thing, as people you love die and disappear. Typically, it starts with parents, and then before you know it, it's your friends as well. But what I say is, well, it's very hard to lose someone you love, but remember that there are people that you love who are still around. Not everybody you love is gone. So, for example, if you have children and grandchildren, they are there and you love them and they are part of your world. So it's not all bad. So that's an example of how important to recognize your circumstances, acknowledge the bad part of it, some of the bad aspects of it, but also realize there's much room left for the positive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was noticing in the part, so I just want to say about the book that you cover so much of life and life as oldish. And you were just mentioning grief. And I have the quote from your book, grief is the continuation of love, not the price of love. You weave the grief into your life. You give it a permanent place. It is there forever. And that is definitely a different perspective on grief than is often thought about. And I agree, I'm on the same page as you about what to do with grief and to acknowledge it, to weave it into your life.
Well, one way of thinking about grief, I think, Janet, is it's part of the rich tapestry of life, which has many components to it. It's in some respects a bad thing, I suppose, not a bad thing, a difficult thing to grapple with. But it's part of your life. It's part of everybody's life, particularly as you become old. It's not something to run away from. It's not something to be embarrassed by. It's not something to keep silent about. It's something to embrace and recognize. So one of the essays you may have noticed in the book is about my friend Murray, who was my best friend. We've been best friends since we were teenagers. Mm-hmm. We spoke on the phone every day. He lived not far from where I saw him all the time. And he died in May of last year. And that was, a terrible blow. Not just to me, but to many people. He was a very well-liked person. He was a husband and a father. And unfortunately, he became a grandfather just a few months after he died. He never knew his first grandchild. But that was a very hard thing to deal with, to grapple with, to understand, to come to terms with. But it would be a horrible reaction to try and forget Murray, or not to talk about Murray, not to think about him. That would be absolutely the worst thing to do. So you continue to do those things, and you weave his memory, which is still very strong in my mind, into your life. It becomes part of your life. And there's some reassurance in that. There's some pleasure in that. There's, it's difficult, but it's not bad. I think people who try and shut away their grieving, to try and dispense with their memories of people they love to have died, making a mistake.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you hear over and over again, though, people will say to people who are grieving, get over it. And that's a really poor instruction, sure. I'm pretty sure. And my opinion is, you're right, that one of the things that we're learning most about in our oldishness is grieving. It's hard to get away from. So there was 30, 40 years that I went through where it was really rare for me to know somebody that had died, except for, the older people. And but anyway, the a lot of people try to close that off. They try to, I'm going to get over it. I'm done with that.
Mistake. I think you have to embrace it.
I think embracing it is the right thing, and discover that the way to handle the pain in your heart, and grief is a heart pain, the way to handle the pain in your heart is to be with it and let it expand your heart until your heart is big enough that it can include the grief without the pain necessarily. That's a lesson I'm unfortunately often learning. I had a sister pass away last month. The girl who was my first ever crush in elementary school, and we'd remained friends all these years, passed away. And, my life is different. It's the first time it never had her in it.
Yes. I mean, another thing I see, we all know this, is particularly difficult as you age, as you become oldish, is the good health that you took for granted and never thought about. Suddenly isn't there anymore. Many people with a little bit of luck and some good genes pretty much don't think about illness or weakness or feebleness until what? They're well into the 60s, 70s, maybe even older. They just assume good health, and it will last forever. But we oldish people know that it doesn't last forever. And as you age increasingly, you have to pay more and more attention to your physical well-being to the extent that you can. But it's a losing battle. We all know that. It's a battle we're all going to lose. Nonetheless, it's a battle you fight. Now, how do you, as you age, how do you and your friends, your cohort, members of your cohort, think about that and deal about it? Do you try and forget about it, ignore it, not talk about it? Is it a weakness to talk about it? Is it boring to talk about it? I mean, sometimes when old people get together for, let's say, a dinner party, there's the famous organ recital, right? Everybody checks in on the other person's spleen and pancreas and lungs. Is that a good thing to do or not? I personally find it kind of tedious, but maybe I'm wrong in that respect. But it is the case that all people of age have to pay a lot of attention to their body in a way that they never used to have to do. That's, again, a big feature of the aging process. And you have to think about it and figure out how to deal with that without it consuming your life and without it depressing the hell out of you. We have to cope with it. I mean, becoming old has, there's a lot of things you got to cope with. You didn't have to cope with before.
Yes. And as a psychologist, one of the things I believe very strongly is that the more we can do our work along the way, the more we're going to be ready to handle kind of the intensity of aging. Being able to put things in perspective, which I feel like you were just talking about a minute ago, is what is the perspective that we're going to have about this, or as we grow, that changes, as opposed to with grief, do we hide it? Do we let go of it? Or the perspective of it's there and let's make room for it. Let's see it as it weaves into our tapestry.
Yeah, I mean, another interesting part of all this, I think, is what I know that some geriatric psychiatrists and perhaps psychologists as well call life review, the tendency that old people have to start ruminating on their life, thinking about it and trying to understand it to the extent you can ever understand a life, trying to think what was good, what was bad. Some people shy away from that process. What's the point? You can't change the past. You can't often really understand the past. I mean, often what happens to your life is the result of things beyond your control, in the country you were born in, the geopolitical situation. So what's the point of mulling over all of that? But I personally think that provided it doesn't consume you, obsess you, life review makes a lot of sense. The unexamined life, said Socrates, is not worth living. I think it is worth examining life and examining your life and trying to understand it to the extent that's possible. Parts of it will never be understandable. But to the extent you can understand the parts that are understandable, I think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think so too. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons for the infirmities of age. And in some ways, it's the universe saying, sit down and shut up and look at your life for a change. Stop running around, stop striving, stop whatever it is that you're doing, and just sit down and shut up for a while, which I think is pretty good medicine. I notice that when sometimes I'll hurt a knee or something, and I can't run around much for a couple of weeks. And that was one of the big differences where seemed like when I was younger, I could break a bone and, be back playing basketball in 2 weeks. And now it's like if I stub my toe, I'm out of commission for a month. But during that month, I can think about, what does a toe mean?
Well, one of the sections in your book was called The Person You Might Have Been. And the idea of the life review, a parallel existence, what might that have been, is actually documented by psychologists as a way of thinking around developmental milestones up into our aging years. And that is, some people feel like it's essential for healthy aging to be able at some point, and sometimes it happens in our 50s or 60s, of being able to look back and say, what was it that I wanted to do that I'm not going to be able to do now? Because up until that point, like riding a motorcycle across country, it's up until a certain point, it's like, oh, I'll do that at some point. And then it's like, no, actually, I can't do that. To cross that off my bucket list. And so it is that piece of, you were talking about understanding, and I also would add accepting. Sometimes we don't understand, but if we can look at it and accept, I'm not going to go on that motorcycle ride.
Yes, I think that's so. I mean, one of the essays in that book, I forget what it's called now, but one of the essays in that book is about the immigrant experience, which is common to many, many people in this country, Canada, and certainly in your country as well, the United States. Now, the case of my family, it immigrated from the United Kingdom to Canada when I was 10 years old, 1954. And I've always felt a strong connection to England, even though I left it as a child. I did actually return there for 4 years later on to go to university and maintain close connections with friends and relatives ever since. So I go there fairly often. And I feel a deep kind of affinity for the country. And I'm very comfortable in it when I'm there. And it almost, although I hesitate to say this, I think I may say it in the book, it almost feels like home. I mean, my home is Canada and has been for a long time. And by the way, it's a very good place to have as your home. But nonetheless, if I sort of walk the streets of London, let's say, when I'm there, and I think to myself, supposing we'd never left, supposing we had never gone to Canada, what would my life have been like? And where would I have lived? What would I have done? I met my wife in Canada. We were in high school together. So I wouldn't have met, how my life would have been a totally different life. And it could easily have happened. My father just walked into the house one day and said, moving to Canada. So I think it was a bit of a shock for my mother. But that easily could not have happened. And I think all of us can think of junctures in our life where something important happened, but it easily could not. Well, then what would my life have been like? One of the things I like to do, I'm a writer now. I didn't used to be, but I'm a writer now. And I've written one novel and I'm working on another. I like to let my imagination go. That's the thing, is partly dependent on imagination. So my imagination can work my own what ifs. And to your point, and I think there's one essay about how there was a time when anything was possible. You might get a call from the Prime Minister of Canada offering you the job of ambassador to France. Or you might get a call from Charlotte Rampling asking if you can come over to Paris to have dinner with her. Or you might this or you might that. No, of course, it's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous, but there's a time in your life when you think, well, it could have happened. Yeah. No, it could happen. But now it's not going to happen now. So to your point.
Yes.
So that's another thing, I suppose, is difficult about becoming oldish, is the doors sort of close. But not all of the doors close.
As much in oldishness as in other parts of life, if a door closes, usually the wind from that opens another one.
Well, I wish that was the case. I hope it's the case. But I don't know.
Well, so far, so good.
I wanted to ask where this book came from for you. When I was reading about your friend Murray, and I thought, was that kind of like the stimulus? Or where have you come in your life into this time of oldishness that got you thinking about these things?
I don't really have much of an answer to that, Jan Ed. I started writing a Substack. I was having lunch with a friend who was doing a Substack. I didn't really know much about Substacks. But she was explaining it to me, and she said, oh, it's easy. You should do one. Very easy. I think you go on, haven't you?
Greg has one.
Yeah, I have one, and I spent some time this morning starting a Substack for this podcast.
So I thought, well, why not? So I started looking into it. And I picked the Endgame as sort of my theme because of my personal circumstances. Just as something that interested me. But I hadn't really thought it out terribly carefully. It just kind of grew like topsy. It's been modestly successful. I think it's got about last time I looked, around 7,000 was, which is modestly successful. But it's free, right? All you got to do is check a box to get it. Yeah, I think if I started charging for it, it'd have significantly less followers. But then once I got into it, I started thinking more about it and being more interested in it. And it's helped me organize my own thinking. And it's helped me express some of the feelings I've had from time to time. So, for example, I was telling about things about London, England. I went there, I go there a couple of times a year.
Yeah, that's a very good way to approach it. Substack is challenging in that it has become as popular as it has.
Yes.
And
Everybody used it.
yes. And it's become my feed on when I go to check things on Substack, my feed is starting to look more like Instagram, where there's pictures and memes and short movies and way too much politics and so on. But I get some poetry things on my page and some other things that I wasn't going to see otherwise. So it's kind of like a morning magazine in a sense, but there's clearly some algorithm at play in the background.
Yeah.
And I've learned to become leery of algorithms.
I think that's a very good leeriness to have.
Yeah, it's a little bit scary. But the idea that it's easy to write, it's easy to publish. You don't have to get anybody's permission.
Not easy to write. What I write is not easy to write. Yeah, I'm a very slow writer. And I believe very much in revision. And I will sometimes agonize, and I'm not exaggerating, agonize over a particular word. This word does not seem quite the right word for me. There must be a better word to express what I want to say. So that adds to the slowness of my writing. I mean, the typical Endgame Substack post is about 650 words, which is a lot. But it's laborious. The production of it is laborious because of the way I do it. People say, well, why write books? I mean, millions of people write books. I think it was 500,000 books a year published in the United States of America. Everybody's writing a book, I've never met anybody who's writing a book. Margaret Atwood tells the story of meeting some distinguished surgeon at a party, and he says, when I retire, I'm going to write a book. And she said, when I retire, I'm going to become a surgeon. And people say, well, why bother? Particularly since many books don't sell very well and not very successful. So my answer is, I essentially write for a readership of one, and that's me. I write for my own satisfaction. And if you're writing something and you look at your computer screen, and you look at a paragraph you've worked on, you've revised, you say to yourself, that's good. That's what I wanted to say. And that's how I wanted to say it. There's enormous satisfaction. And anything else is gravy.
Well, you've pulled off one of the things that I've always known to be the sign of really good writing, which is it's laborious in the background and painstaking in the background, but it doesn't read that way.
People often, I think, don't understand how difficult it is to write well. It's not easy. It is difficult to do that. And there's so much writing that is not good. Particularly, please don't take offense at this, Janet, but particularly in academic circles. I used to be a professor of law, and the stuff that some of my then colleagues used to write, it may have been learned, it may have charted new legal ground, but boy, it was badly written. And of course, writing is a form of communication, right? And if it's badly written, hard to understand, tedious, annoying, that's not good. You're not communicating.
No. I wanted to interject something about your book, which is I appreciated that you, at times, when you're talking about a specific topic, made room for the reality that it didn't relate to everybody. So there was times when you said, you could be healthy for a long time, and then you're thinking about traveling, or you like to travel, but then you stop traveling or you slow down, and you would say, I don't know if this is a real example, but the idea of if you have the funds and if you've been able to in your life travel. So you said that in different contexts. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that this is a continuum of what it means to become oldish.
Exactly right. I'm very conscious when I write those essays that I've had a very good one. I've been healthy most of it. In fact, still am pretty healthy from octogenarian. I've had enough money to do what I wanted to do, pretty much. I've had a good and interesting career. I've had a good family life. I mean, I have been very lucky. It's not all attributable to my own particular planning and genius. A lot of it is just good luck, good genes. As I say, I think in the author's note, who I am at the end of the book, I had good genes and good luck. It's just about the whole story right there. That's not true of everybody.
Right.
That's not true of a lot of people. A lot of people have severe, serious difficulty in their life through no fault of their own. Sometimes it is through fault of their own, but often not. And you're exactly right. I was often conscious that be careful how you put this. Don't assume that everybody is able to travel internationally if they feel like it. Don't assume stuff like that. Don't assume that everybody's able to take nice holidays in the winter time, because most people are not.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important to remember.
Yes, yes. Well, I wanted to say something about the end of your book where it talks about the author. First of all, one of the quotes, as he aged, he realized the preeminent importance of friendship, kindness, and generosity, which is what it's all about. But I wanted to ask, it was all in the past tense. I wondered why you wrote about the author in past tense.
I wrote it as a sort of pro-obituary.
Yes, that's
you'll
what
notice
it felt like.
there's the name in 1944 dash. The dash is yet to be, or the blank space after the dash is yet to be filled in. It was in that style. But just to comment on that particular, I think that's right at the end of that account description. So for 20 years, I was corporate lawyer on Bay Street, which is Canada's equivalent of Wall Street. I was a partner in a very large corporate law firm, the biggest in Canada, with offices around the world. And that was an interesting experience. In some ways, it was an excellent experience. It was very challenging, very difficult, intellectually very difficult. I mean, practicing law at a high level is intellectually very difficult, physically demanding. Yes, but I regard all those as good things. In other respects, it was absolutely horrible. Mm-hmm. There was very little room for those qualities that you just mentioned, that you just wrote down: kindness, generosity. These things do not figure large in the life of those who inhabit Wall Street or Bay Street or places like that. And the reason why after 20 years I decided to leave is because I could no longer accept the fact that what I was doing really, as I like to put it, with a little bit of just, but not much, that my job was basically to make rich people a little bit richer. That's what people on Wall Street, Bay Street do. They make rich people a little bit richer, and they get handsomely rewarded for it. But again, as you become old, as you move into the realm of oldish and look back on that, how can you take satisfaction from what you did? You may live in a big house and have a big fancy car and all the rest of it, but how can you take any pride and satisfaction on that? So that's why I said, I don't remember the exact language now, but that's why I said at the end, said something about, catching up for lost time.
Yes. So we frequently, and this is not to say that we're getting toward the end here, but to fill in a silence, we frequently ask our guests two what we think of are important oldish questions. The first one is, in your oldishness, what are you happiest about? What are you looking forward to in oldishness? And the other one is, what are you afraid of in oldishness?
Let me just, before I answer those questions, I'll try to comment on the silence that you refer to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all I'd say about that is that in music, a rest in the musical score is important, if not more important than any of the rest of it. So the silence of the rest can be very significant and important. Okay, your questions. Question 1 is what? Again, tell me again.
What are you excited about? I guess is the way that Janet usually puts it. What excites you in your oldishness, and the other one is what scares you in your oldishness?
Well, I would say that what excites me, and let me slightly rephrase that, what gives me pleasure, what makes me feel good when I get up in the morning is maybe 2 things. The first, and I'm sure this is pretty much universal, the first is the company of the communication with members of my family and my friends. I'm blessed to have a lot of friends. I have children and grandchildren, and they are a huge and increasingly large part of my life. So that's one thing. But the other thing is the work that I've chosen to do for the last 25 years is write books. I'm still doing that. I'm still working hard at it, and I'm productive at it. And I find it enormously satisfying and stimulating. I'm writing a novel right now. I was working on it just before I joined this call. And then I was thinking about a particular passage in the book about my central character, who is a Sicilian, and he's taking a train from Taormina to Syracuse in Sicily, and he's on the train, and he's looking out of the window, and I'm imagining all this in my head and trying to express it. And that is very exciting and gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
I think work is important. I don't think you should ever quit working. You may change the work you do to something else, but you should never quit working. I've never understood this concept of, retiring at 65 or whatever, and then what do you do? You play golf for a year or two, and then you drop dead as far as I can figure out. So I think that's the other part of it. So family and friends and work. As to what I fear, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I have the normal fears that anybody has. Somebody in your family is going to get hit by a bus. I don't worry too much. I think only for old people have to consider the prospect of their own death and how that will be and how you would like that to happen, because it is going to happen. In Canada, as I'm sure you know, we have an increasingly important legal process of medical assistance death called MAID, Medical Assistance of Death, MAID. Currently, about 7 or 8% of deaths in Canada are attributable to MAID, but the numbers are growing all the time, and the scope, rather controversially, the scope of it is growing as well through legislation like the Canadian Parliament. As it happens, in the last 2 weeks, 2 of my friends have had MAID. It's interesting to think about it. As far as one can tell, the people who have made you have to request it, obviously. And often the people who have it organize it. There's a ceremony, the family of the president, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was present at one of these maids, my friends that occurred last week, and they said it was like a wedding. It was almost celebratory. And there was kind of happiness in the room, even though someone was dying. And contrast that with the miserable hospital, inch by inch death that is the gift to us of modern medicine. So I think, to try and address your question directly, Gray, I think people fear their death in differing degrees, but that means you should think about it, and to the extent it's possible, and if you live in a country where it's possible, you should try and decide how you want to die, what's the best way to die for you and for those who care about you.
Can I ask you how that works as far as, is there a specific way, like if someone decides to end their life through MAID, is it a shot that they get or a pill, or
Uh, I don't know the exact medical details, but yes, there's a series of shots that they get us. So there's a well-accepted medical process for doing this. And it is administered by two doctors. And it follows a process, of course, of ensuring consent by the person who's dying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all sorts of safeguards built into the system.
Okay.
The system is evolving. Began with, I may not have this exactly right, but initially it was you were only eligible for it if your death was reasonably foreseeable within 6 months. So people who saved the trouble of all the horror of 6 months of terrible illness and you were dying. It's been expanded lately, and it's somewhat controversially, to include, they've removed the 6 month requirement. So, you can request made even death from whatever ails you is not reasonably foreseeable in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, there's a big controversy in this country about whether or not it should be extended to people with severe mental illness. And of course, there you have a problem of capacity to consent, because people who are severely mentally ill could have that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the country is struggling with this, but I think it's fair to say, it's correct to say that in some form it's generally accepted, certainly legal now. There's a big debate about whether it should be extended, expanded in scope. And a lot of people increasingly are making this choice. You read obituaries and it says so-and-so at a time of their own choosing. That's sort of the code phrase for medical assistance in death. A lot of people, of course, are pretty much opposed to this. And one of the interesting things is that there are journalists in your country, in the United States, who are horrified by this development in Canada. So, for example, Ross Douthat of the New York Times is constantly writing op-ed pieces about how horrible this is. And there was a piece in the Atlantic not long ago, Atlantic magazine, in a similar strain. Anyway, I'm digressing here. But I think it would be right to say, Greg, that that's what older people fear, certainly maybe their greatest fear. Some people, of course, may fear economic deprivation, dying in poverty. That was a horrible thing to have happen. Mm-hmm. Some people may fear dying alone, if they have no close relatives or friends to help them. So there's a kind of smorgasbord of fears here associated with getting old and death.
Yeah, I find it interesting. There are many people of my acquaintance who express a greater fear of death than others, but they also, in the next breath, will say that they fully expect to go to heaven. And I've never understood that. If you're going to go from here to heaven, what are you afraid of?
Well, you don't have to believe in heaven to kind of have this issue. After somebody said that life is just a brief spot between two immense periods of nothing. Before you're born and after you die. And many writers have commented that to be afraid of being dead is ridiculous. To be afraid of dying is different, but to be afraid of being dead is ridiculous. You have no idea. I don't know. I'm certainly personally not afraid of being dead for sure. And I'm not afraid of dying, provided that the process is not too terrible. And that's where the comes in. Woody Allen, I know not everybody's a great fan of Woody Allen, but Woody Allen said he's not afraid of dying, just doesn't want to be there when it happens.
That's a great line.
It is good.
Well, it makes me think of the song by Blood, Sweat, and Tears about dying. I'm not afraid of dying, and I don't really care. If it's peace you find from dying, let the dying time be near.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about death and dying is how when you're young, maybe when you're middle-aged, it's an entirely remote concept that has no meaning for you. In some sense that you will eventually die, but it has no impact on you. But at some point, move into being oldish, you suddenly think, wait a minute, this is real and it maybe not really far away. And you have to adapt to that thought somehow.
Yes. Well, I want to say one more thing about the book, which is there's humor and lots of thoughtfulness. There was one section called "We Need to Talk About Toilets." I just want to let the audience know as they think about reading this book that I loved that you had that section, and of course, it's real for all of us as we age. So thank you for this book.
Thank you for the
Definitely not bad.
several people
better than not bad.
Several people said to me that these sort of bite-sized bits. If you can read one or two before you turn out the light and go to bed, so it's going to save something. You don't have to get it. It's not War and Peace. It's not a major undertaking to read it. You can do it in bits.
But every bit is tasty.
Every bit is tasty, yes.
Yeah, it's like having a little box of chocolates next to the bed. And you have one before you go to sleep. Every bit is tasty. None of them is a meal, but every one is tasty. But many of them that I've read, if you sit with it afterwards, it kind of takes the place of a meal. There's a lot of thought went into some of these, and a lot of living, a lot of life went into each one of the ones that I've read. And I haven't read them all yet, but each one that I've read, there's a lot of life applied, and it's really well done. And I would like to issue an invitation that if you can, in this novel that you're writing now, if you can sneak in an oldish character or an oldish theme or two, we have an oldish book club where periodically every month or two, Janet and I and a friend of ours pick a book to read, and then we talk about it for half an hour or so on our oldish book club. And oldish themes are kind of important to be in there. So if you stick an oldish theme in this book, then we'll do it.
I'll introduce a couple of minor characters, but nonetheless characters in this novel called Greg and Janet.
Well, then we'll definitely read your book in our oldish book club if that's the case. And we'll just sit here smiling. That'll be the whole podcast. We'll just sit here grinning because that was fun.
Well, thank you.
Well, this has been fun. And I hate to say it, but what you said about the maid is yet another reason I'm thinking about maybe Canada, which is only 50 miles from here, would be a better place for me to hang out than here.
Well, I don't want to get into politics, but maybe it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it would. And one of my big disappointments in life in the last 5 years is that my grandmother was born in Nova Scotia.
Whereabouts? Whereabouts Nova Scotia?
Halifax.
Oh, I know Nova Scotia very well. Until just a few months ago, we had a house there, which we had it for 30 years, which we just sold right on the sea in the so-called South Shore of Nova Scotia. It's a very interesting, beautiful place.
Oh, yeah, I love that spot. I love all of Nova Scotia. I think of it as a really large Acadian National Park. I don't know if you've ever been to Acadian National Park in Maine, but Nova Scotia's, all of it that I've been in is just like Acadian National Park, but there's a lot more of it.
No, Greg. In Nova Scotia grandmother, you might be eligible for Canadian citizenship. You should consult an immigration lawyer.
Yeah, I think I will, but what I've seen on the evil internet is that there's not, because she's not still alive, it may not be possible to, I think that was the reason. There's some reason why the dual citizenship or the Canadian citizenship wouldn't be available. I have cousins there that many of whom I've actually never met, but there are still folks there, and I'd move to Nova Scotia in a heartbeat if I could stay.
You could come as a refugee.
Well, that's a thought. Seek asylum. Yeah, that's a thought. Well, on that cheerful note, I want to thank you, Philip, for being with us today, and really thank you a lot for writing all these essays. I've only been dipping my toe in for the last couple of weeks, and many of them have already made a difference in how I look at the world and cheered me up quite a bit. And I just this morning went back through and reread the one feeling seedy about going into a library and reading all the diseases that you might have and having them all.
That's Jerome K. Jerome, 3 Men in a Boat. It's a wonderful book, that movie of it, which is good fun. You can see it on YouTube.
3 Men in a
Not
Boat.
mention a dog.
Okay.
That's the added on. It's the full title is 3 Men in a Boat, not to mention a dog.
Aha. So I think I read that many years ago. I'll go and find that. So anyway, thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation, and
Meet you both if only over the internet.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we switch to Canadian citizenship, we'll look you up. All right. Goodbye,
Yes.
Philip. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We had a great conversation with author Philip Slayton about his Substack The Endgame and his recently published collection of essays from it, All Remaining Passengers. He's had a very interesting life and has thought deeply and entertainingly about it. You can find All Remaining Passengers in our Oldish bookshop on bookshop.org. There is a link to it in the show notes. If you purchase this or any of the other books we've curated there, Oldish will get a small commission, and an independent bookstore of your choice will get a percentage of the purchase price. It's a great way to support authors, your local bookstore, and Oldish. Speaking of books, our next installment of the Oldish Book Club, featuring The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, will be published soon. Stay tuned. And don't forget to love everybody. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there, too, if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.